Morning all. I had a very interesting game last night. Barnet Elizabethans were playing away at Royston. Quite a long trek in the Hertfordshire League though, quite far from Barnet. But anyway, we managed to arrive there in time. My opponent, Kevin Clark, I played with several times in the past, up and down results. So last night, E4, and I played the Sicilian Defence actually. He played C3, which does take a lot of fun out of playing the Sicilian. Nevertheless, knight F6, Nmc3 influence to try and provoke white to go forward here. He plays actually, the main move is to play E5. I played knight D5. In fact, just stepping back, against the C3 Sicilian, knight F6 is actually the most common move, checking my book here just for future reference. So this is the most common approach, knight D5. And now knight F3 was played. Actually, a little bit more common is just to play D4 here straight away. So knight F3, and then I played knight C6. We saw bishop C4, and I supported it with E6. Not too concerned about the double pawns. I don't think that's a big deal for white taking on D5. It's not the main move. The main two moves are D4 and castling. He played D4. I took on D4. C takes D4. And now the main move by far, we're talking 1600 over 1600 games, is D6. I actually played something which has only been played 32 times before, which is knight B6, which I thought was sensible. Let's have a quick look at D6. Why is this played so much? White usually castles here. Bishop E7, Queen E2, black castles, knight C3, and now black usually takes on C3. Takes, D takes, D takes, Queen A5. It's been played 194 games. Bishop D2, Rook D8, Rook Fe1. This kind of position seems to be very solid for black, and very nice. I think any kind of attempt to play bishop C2 here, well, there's a game with bishop C2, I think just G6. So that's the kind of solid position which could result in the system generally. That's a very, very popular path. So what I'd embarked on with knight B6 is much, much rarer, believe it or not. But I did have a particular idea to close the centre with D5 now to blunt the bishop. And it looks silly to castle with this bishop on this diagonal, but that wasn't my idea. Actually, usually after D5, the most common move here with 88 games is to take en passant, not to castle. So taking en passant, I mean castling is just 9 games, so taking en passant is the main played move actually here. And for example, bishop takes D6, castles, knight C3, bishop E7. This kind of position here looks okay for black as well. So black's volunteering the dark square bishop here, doesn't have to be taken, and we get this kind of position sometimes. Okay, there's been a game in this, so that's interesting as well. But he let me get away with just blunting the bishop here and just castled. And let's put on a Kbitsa now in this position. I played bishop E7, and after knight C3, there's not too many game references anymore from this position. So these moves have been played before, but I played differently. Can you guess what I played if I give you 10 seconds starting from now? Okay, I don't know if this is any good, but I think I've had some fun games in Blitz with G5. It looks a bit like a French defence idea to try and put pressure on white's centre. Apparently, from an engine point of view, this is okay for white, more than okay. This position, it's not really rated much. Say bishop E3, just ignoring it really. That's probably why it's probably a very, very good thing to do. We'll just put the knight here. Now threatening Queen H5. I think probably in this position it's about half a pawn advantage in theory to white. But what we saw instead, what I saw instead was h3, and I carry on with aggressive intense h5. I was wondering in post-mortem if g4 here was a good idea, but maybe black's okay. Bishop d7 doesn't have to take. If black takes, I can see that white's going to play king g2 pretty soon here. I think white's better for that. Probably best to leave it with bishop d7, and if taking, there's no big deal, just rook takes h5. So I think this might be okay actually, to play a6, and well, let's say king g2, knight a5, rook h1, rook c. I think black's okay here, mostly okay. In fact, that c4 square is quite interesting. So this didn't happen. White's, I think white's a little better actually, yeah. So, but in the game we see knight h2 was played. I played bishop d7 with the idea that I want to get my rook to c8 to be able to answer f4 with knight takes d4 as a threat, at least for bishop c5 to secure the queen against the king. Plays f4, rook c8, so the threat now is knight takes d4. We see king h1, and I just played g4, and actually technically the engine's actually like black now, believe it or not. The queen's kind of tied down to d4 here. The knight's a little bit out of play, being a bit squashed here. If white tries to take this pawn, I mean, that's given me this nice pin. If queen takes g4, knight takes d4, black's just better here. I mean, queen g7, rook f8, I think is sufficient. And I don't think f5 particularly works. That can be taken. I don't think the exchange sack is that menacing. Black's better here. So after g4, white played actually f5 in this position immediately, and it looks as though f6 is really tasty, and undermining d5 pawn is quite tasty looking. At least superficially, it looks like a very tasty and logical idea to play f5 here. What would you play with black here if I gave you 10 seconds starting from now? Or you might want to pause the video. Okay, I just played e takes f5 actually. I know it looks horrendous to have double pawns, but this is superficially because what's happened also, if white's taking on d5, there's an issue a little bit with d4. He did take on d5. I took here, bishop takes, and then bishop e6. I've got frontal pressure. Pardon me. I've got frontal pressure on d4. There seems to be a backward pawn here. Where can the bishop go, without losing d4? I mean, bishop b3, and to take on d4, same with the queen. It's no big deal. So the bishop took, and I have an ideal position. I've just healed my pawn structure, and basically white's got a backward pawn, and I've got a huge d5 square. This knight's kind of out of play. This, even if it doesn't open lines, it's just restricting the knight. So there's actually like 2 trump cards positioning in this position. Well, 3, backward pawn, use of d5, and bad knight out of the game. So I enjoyed my position here immensely at move 19. I thought this is a fantastic position. If you try a dynamic move d5, which wasn't played, maybe I just take here. And we have this, if rook takes knight d4, and I'm coming to the 7th rank quite quickly. I think if rook f4, knight e2 is quite menacing. If rook f1, knight g3 check. If rook f2, I think there's just g3 looks strong as a move here. That's actually not mentioned by engines. Oh, sorry, because the knight is on. No, just knight g3 check and bishop c5 is strong. So there doesn't seem to be that many decent squares in this position for the rook. if rook f2 is mentioned, allowing g3 here. So rook d2, knight c2 attacking the rook, and that's winning. That's very, very good for black. So this position here for d5, it looks as though just queen takes d5 is possible because of this knight d4. If the rook, by the way, just went all the way back to f1, let's just examine that. Knight e2 threatens knight g3 check. And what does white do here? You have rook e1 check, and well, I think bishop c5. There's bishop e3, but just g takes, f takes here, rook g8. This is better for black. We're almost +5 here actually. d4 for some reason. Oh, because of knight e2 check. And this is really bad. What does white do here? Well, so where does the king go? If it goes to f2, then rook c2 check. I think the king's getting actually hounded. It's horrible. It's a massacre. So I think this opportunity for d5 is not too much of a dynamic threat. White plays bishop e3. I play queen d5, and I just thought it's beautiful. So I'm threatening now g takes h3. And this is a horrendous move to have to play. If this is one of the best moves, actually engines think it is the best move. I just double the pawns now. Queen takes, a takes, and I just blockade, try and blockade, and stop any nonsense on a7. Actually, the engine's suggestion is just a6 here, or king f7, or king d7. Actually, king d7 looks a bit strange. I played rook d8, trying to just blockade the d pawn, but if a6, that looks good as well. This d5 needs to be factored in again here. In this position, it's okay for black. King d7, and what is black threatening? I'm just taking it's just an active position for black, but I wanted to restrain d5. I played actually rook d8, which I think is still a reasonably good move. And because if nothing else, as well as helping double, this rook can come here later for b3. Plays rook fd1, I play rook d5, knight f1, and knight's threatening one day to come to e3 if this bishop moved. I castled here, so knight g3 attacking h5. There's f4, so that's not possible. My opponent plays hg. After hg, I just got a gorgeous position. Maybe hg wasn't the best, but I don't know what else white's doing. If bishop g1, f4, and I'm just kind of controlling e3 here. So this position looks really quite good. Okay, but he played hg, I played hg, bishop f2, knight's threatening to come to e3. So I stopped that. I play f4, and I'm also threatening maybe g3 and bishop g1 to go for the king in some lines, because the kings run out of squares. Just to show that as an example. I mean, if rook d2, for example, g3, if the bishop went back, king g7 simply threatens rook h8, and this is actually nearly +5. So white's got to be careful here. White playing g3, and this gives me an opportunity just to take on the bishop. Has to take with the bishop. I play rook f3, and it just looks, I thought, horrendous for white here. If he's going to lose b3, I think that's just a nightmare. If king g2, I just take on b3, and I'm on b2 now. d4 still dropping off. I just thought this is at least +2 now. So actually he blundered here. He played bishop e1, and so I'm just taking on f1, and he resigned. Yeah, it was an interesting game. I just yeah, strange how this actual, there aren't too many games with, believe it or not, in my live book g5 is not mentioned. I've got 3 games with castles, 2 with a6, two with bishop d7 and one with knight a5. This idea just comes from kind of French defense type positions. But yeah, objectively, if we're trying to be objective here, I don't think this should have worked so well. So I wouldn't try this at home necessarily. I mean, white's best is probably just to ignore it. Bishop e3, as mentioned. If white just ignores it, you know, every time I play g4, I think I'm just weakening my position, because he's always got f3 or something. Here actually, yes, engine does come up with f3, and this is just used as a lever for that f file. I think white's much better here. Saying this continuation, white's potentially much better. So if we go back to the drawing board on this line, on this whole line, in fact, if we go back earlier after e6 d4, I think we can start to see why the most common move is actually not knight b6 anyway. Well over 1600 games, and only 32 of knight b6 is just d6, and the main moves, you know, just casting queen e2 or a3. So this is the main theory of the position, what I mentioned before. So it was a very interesting, aggressive path to play with black now. I found that quite interesting, how it went. It just gave me some positional trump cards, the way Kevin played it last night, fortunately for me. So f5 wasn't as strong as it looked, but if white didn't play f5, then maybe that c4 square is pretty good. Okay, I hope you got something from that. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.